Hi, I'm Janelle Pizarro.
And I'm Frederick Philip Von Weiss, and thank you for consuming the Thunder Nerds, a conversation with the people behind the technology
that love what they do and do tech good.
Doing tech. Jen Simmons.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real honor to have you on here. I've personally listened to you on the podcast for a long time, big fan, so it's really neat to actually talk to you in person.
Thanks. Yeah, I miss making a podcast. At some point I'll get back to it somehow.
Yeah, do you still have that?
Yeah, it's such a great format. I really love doing it. But these days I've been focusing on making videos for Layout Land. So
yeah, I watched some of your CSS Grid videos, and yeah, those are really awesome. I think Val put a link on there on the old Twitters yesterday, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right,
Yeah, we watched them as a company. It was great.
That's cool. It's always good to hear that people like them.
Yeah, for sure.
So, design advocate, host, obviously, and executive producer of The Web Ahead.
Yeah.
Do you mind telling our audience a little bit about you?
Sure. So I'm a web designer. I've been designing websites since 1996. But also, I started in theater, and I was doing a lot of print design at the same time, and a lot of arts administration and event production. And then I was teaching a lot. I went to film school, and I was teaching as a professor. Also while making websites, but then I moved to New York. It was so exciting. I'm like, yay, I'm in New York. And I guess I thought maybe I would be doing theater, but I needed to pay my rent. So
well, there's this play called Rent, so that ties into that.
Well, so I stopped doing theater at that point and really did web full time. So it's been I don't know how many years focusing on the web and teaching through things like Layout Land or teaching at conferences like an event apart, and which is where we are right now. And yeah, like being able to have like a bigger impact, which is pretty exciting. So these days I work at Mozilla, the company that makes the Firefox browser.
Yeah, we all love Mozilla.
Yes. So much.
Yeah, those dev tools are really nice.
And yeah, so my job is designer and developer advocate, which means that I get to come to events and talk to people and get information about what developers need or what designers need, what the trends are, which are all things that I was paying attention to already anyway, but I get to spend even more time doing research and then take that information back to Mozilla and be like, yes, we need to implement CSS Shapes, which we just shipped. And yes, people are excited about a grid inspector. Let's go ahead and make some other tools or whatever I can help make sure that, help the company set priorities both in implementing to the browser and in implementing sometimes dev tools and things. But then also it's my job to be a representative of Mozilla and to go out into the world and to help people understand how to make websites better. So, and I've been focusing on CSS and focusing on graphic design, especially in layout the last 5 years actually. And accessibility and semantic web, and how do you make a great website? How do you make sure it works all the time? How do you make sure it works on every device for every person using every kind of different piece of technology they might be using under any kind of network condition? Those kinds of values of what the web is about are very important to many of us, and they're very important to Mozilla. So it's part of what Mozilla does, and then having MDN the website as well with all those docs to be like, hey, we care about you. We want to make your job easier. We want to make sure that you're able to do this well. We want to make sure that the long-term health of the web is good because the people who are making the web are good at their jobs. So it's a great partnership match, whatever job, to be able to run around and be like, hey.
That must be so much fun to be able to express, do your passion as your job and be able to get the voice out there.
I feel very lucky. And it allowed me as well to join the CSS working group. So I'm a representative of Mozilla along with several of our browser engineers to show up and say, hey, this is the kind of CSS we think should get invented. Grid is awesome, but you know what we also need? We need like the ability to style cells. So maybe we can add that to grid level 3, and maybe that will be a tool that people can use in 2 or 3 or 4 years. But it's cool. And frequently the people who are on the working group are engineers from browser makers, or they're people who are managers or whatever from browser makers. And it's the browser makers coordinating with each other to make sure that whatever CSS or HTML or all the other working groups for all the other web technologies, JavaScript, are the same. The standards are clear and clean and they make sense, and then every browser maker implements things exactly the same. But I get to get on the CSS working group as well and say, yes, I don't actually know all the details of how browsers are made. I don't really know how to build a rendering engine, but I can advocate for designers and developers. I advocate for authors. I advocate for people who make websites so that we get what we need out of CSS.
That's amazing.
I remember when I first saw the cool tools within for I think it was Wes's boss. He did a big thing on CSS Grid, and it was like, oh my God, look at these great tools that you could use. Like, wow, like that was so eye-opening to me.
Yeah, I knew because I started to learn CSS Grid in 2016 before it landed in browsers in March of 2017. But it was in browsers behind experimental flags before that for several years as the browser makers were implementing it and as the working group was finishing the specification, which is very different than what happened with Flexbox. So if you remember with Flexbox, there was, because some things are simple, like border radius. The people who sit on the CSS working group could sit around and be like, hey, let's have rounded corners. Okay, what should we call it? Okay, how should it work? Like this. It's conceptually very easy. Oh, let's implement it. Great, it's implemented, done. But with something like Flexbox, it was much more complicated to figure out how to make it actually work. And so the people who make browsers needed some time to put it in a browser and go, oh, that's a bad idea, let's change it. Oh, yeah, that works well, but it doesn't quite work the way we thought it was. Let's add this. Oh, let's change the name of that. That's a bad name. Let's make a better name.
Wow.
So they did that out in the real world in actual production browsers behind those prefixes, like the -WebKit or the -Moz or the -O or the -MS. Yeah. And that's why we had like 3 totally different versions of Flexbox, where you maybe started using the 2012 version and then it changed and then you had to start using the 2014 version. And then you were like, how do I have both? And then maybe you use this, and it got crazy, crazy ugly. Because the intention was that that was an opportunity for them to do a rough draft, and that we, people who make websites, were not supposed to use it. I didn't know that. I was like, oh, vendor prefixes.
Let me play with this. Yeah.
I'm going to ship this in production.
I could just use Compass, and we'll take care of that.
Yeah, it's awesome. But so it was very, very painful for all of us because the working group kept wanting to change things, and they did, and then people were complaining, and it got hard. You can't only change things so much once they are on real websites, and there's a point at which you can't change it. So the working group, they spent years figuring out Flexbox in the open, kind of like in a world that we could see. A lot of people didn't use Flexbox for a long time. A lot of people were like, I'm not going anywhere near that. That's a big, buggy, incompatible mess.
Let them fix that and I'll play with it.
Yeah, so let me wait 3 years and then maybe I'll learn Flexbox. But with CSS Grid, the browser makers were like, yeah, that did not go well. We are not doing that again. And they didn't, there are no new CSS properties being created with vendor prefixes. Vendor prefixes are like, no. Over. I mean, there's still a little bit older ones that have prefixes, so sometimes you still write those things in your code, but there will be fewer and fewer and fewer of them. There's no new ones being created. And instead, what happened with CSS Grid, because the working group needed that same period of time to try out ideas and to put it into a working web browser and to write code and to experiment with Grid and then be like, no, that's a bad idea. Yeah. Oh, let's change the name of that. Oh, hey, we should add this other thing that we didn't think about at first. So all of that happened. It happened between 2012 and 2017. Y'all just didn't know about it because it was behind a flag. You had to go into Firefox Nightly or Chrome Canary or one of the other experimental browsers. Now it wasn't out yet, but now it would be Safari. What's that Safari one called?
The Nightly one?
Yeah. Well, there's WebKit Nightly. Yeah. But then there's a Safari. There's an experimental Safari browser as well.
It's like a gold.
With the purple logo instead of the blue logo. Yeah. I mean, the name I know, but I just can't remember it right now.
Yeah.
But those browsers, like you can go to about:config in Firefox. You type about:config in the URL bar as if that were a working URL, and it goes to the special secret page. That's like, watch out, you might break everything, and you're like, fine, that's fine. And then you get this big, crazy long list of all of the things that are half finished. It's like being on a development server for a project you're working on, right? Like the difference between the dev server and the production server, where you don't want the client on the dev server because they're going to freak out because everything's half broken. Yeah. It's the same thing. So it's like this way to see the like development version of the browser and see things that are half done. So you can try it out long before. So in 2015, 2016, really for me it was 2016, I started learning Grid by using Firefox Nightly and by having it turned on. And it wasn't finished, and there were things missing, and there were things that were broken. And also my understanding of it was broken. I was still learning it. So it was kind of a chaotic time. Rachel Andrew spent really the entire time that Grid was under construction, it being drafted and being implemented. Rachel was following the development and every time it changed, she understood what that change was and knew what the change was. And she had all those examples of it Grid by example, and she kept updating her examples to match the new version of Grid. And so I was learning from her, and I was learning from Elika Entiman, who's on the working group, who wrote much of the Grid specification. She was helping me a lot. I was like, Elika, can you explain this? So once I got my head kind of wrapped around Grid and I started making demos and playing around with it in Firefox Nightly, and also Chrome Canary, I knew that the hardest thing, especially because Grid was still under construction, I couldn't tell when my code was broken or when the browser was broken, which isn't a normal condition, but it was part of that reality. But then when my code was broken, I couldn't understand if my understanding was broken or if my Grid container code was broken or my Grid item code was broken.
Ooh.
And in large part because I couldn't see anything. And I'm like, but are the lines where I think they are? And I'm putting the items on the wrong line? Or are the lines like not where I think they are? And so I knew we needed a way to quickly visualize what that thing would look like. And so I got together with somebody on my team, Potch, his name is Potch, or his nickname, and we made a Firefox add-on. I was like, Potch, let's make it, let's do it. We need a dev tool. And I wasn't sure how to make a dev tool exist. So I'm like, sometimes the best way to get somebody to do something is to like start competing with them. So we made an add-on, and the intention was never for the add-on to be a big thing. The intention was for the add-on to be a draft, an idea, an experiment, a way for us to figure out, well, how helpful is it to see the lines? How helpful is it to see, do we need numbers? And so we created this Grid Inspector add-on for Firefox that we used for almost, 6 months at least, maybe a little longer. And then I was able to talk to folks like Eric Meyer and Rachel Andrew, and there's a whole group of people in New York City who've been coming to a meetup called the CSS Layout Club. And I had a Slack channel for the CSS Layout Club. And so there was this great group of people, mostly women actually, all these front-end developers from all these amazing companies in New York City who were giving us all this feedback and user testing and being like, okay, you're learning Grid.
Wonderful.
Because we needed to user test it among people who actually knew Grid. And there weren't very many people who knew Grid because Grid wasn't even out yet. It was 2016. But they were coming and learning. And so it was like, okay, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? And then I got the attention of one of our browser engineers, or one of our developer tool engineers, Gabe Long, and he was like, this is awesome, I want to make this.
Yay!
So then he took all the ideas from the plugin and started actually building it into the real dev tool. And then he and I collaborated for the better part of, I don't know, 6 or 8 months until it was ready to ship. And we shipped a very sort of MVP version of it when we shipped Grid in Firefox 52, and then very quickly shipped the rest of it in Firefox 57, where you could see the line numbers and all kinds of things. And there's still a big roadmap, which is a little stalled out. I'm hoping we can get back to that. They will prioritize it and get back to it. But we have area. You can see area names. I really want to be able to see the names of the lines as well.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
And there's lots of ideas. Actually, today I think Gabe is dropping in the ability to turn on more than one grid at once.
Stop.
Because that was always the intention. That's why those are not radio buttons.
Yeah.
Because people are always like, how come those aren't radio buttons? You can only click on one of them. They should be radio buttons. And I'm like, I know they should be, but I don't want to make them radio buttons because you're supposed to be able to turn on more than one.
Oh my gosh.
But there's always been performance problems. Like Gabe made that happen, and then it was like super slow. So like we can't do anything slow. But I think he's finally figured out the performance problems, and we're going to be able to click on, like, turn on more than one, so that you can, if you have 2 grids, you can see if they're lining up the way you want.
I love it.
And then when Subgrid is coming out, because we're working on Subgrid inside Mozilla right now, and I keep hearing like,
I feel like I'm gonna fall out.
I keep hearing Firefox 64, and I'm like, I don't think we're going to ship it in Firefox 64, but I keep hearing that number, which is soon.
Yeah,
like that's before the end of the year. So I'm like, we have to make sure the tool works for subgrids. There's lots and lots of things that we're still working on for the Grid Inspector, but I hope we can continue to polish it and make it better. And
I'm sure you're getting such a great response from people.
Yes. Because, and I've always been a designer and a front-end developer at the same time. It used to be called a webmaster.
That's right. Yeah.
And I love designing in the browser. And you really think about it. Firebug, you had this HTML pane and you had the CSS pane, and it was awesome because you could look at your HTML and you could write CSS. You could rewrite your CSS right there. And then that's all we have. And now it's 15 years later, and that's all you, like until recently, that's still all you have if you're a CSS developer. Like there's all these JavaScript tools, all these performance tools, all these amazing things. But it's like, well, how come there are not more CSS tools?
Yeah.
So the Grid Inspector was the first, well, long before I got to Mozilla, they created an animation inspector to kind of see what's going on with their animations, right? And there's now also a shape path editor. Do you know about the shape path editor?
No.
I haven't played with that.
So if you're using clip path or you're using CSS Shapes, there's a fundamental geometry under the hood that creates the shape. So CSS Shapes, you can take like a photo, for example. You could take anything, but it works great for a photo. You take a photo and you float it.
Okay.
And maybe your photo is of a ball or something that has, grapes and that are like not a square. And like these beautifully photographed grapes on a white background with a white website. And so then you can float that. And if you have text after it, then the text is going to flow around that picture. But all floats so far only ever float, like the text is going to be in a rectangular shape. Right. Yeah. But wouldn't it be awesome if it were like a magazine where the text could flow around the photo? So there's this property called shape outside that you apply to the thing that you floated. So like you apply it to the image. So you say shape dash outside : and you apply it to that photo. And you can apply a circle, an ellipse, or a polygon shape.
And it'll just go with
the text will follow. Instead of the text following what does it usually follow? It follows the margin box of the thing. It will follow the shape box of the thing.
That's amazing.
That's nifty.
So you can have a photo of a person with the text kind of going around the edges of their body or whatever.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Awesome. Shapes, CSS Shapes is awesome. And it's been in Chrome and Safari for a very long time. If we finally shipped it in Firefox recently, or like 3 months ago perhaps, and it's not an Edge yet, but hopefully they'll work on it, especially if people really cry for it and start using it.
Yeah, I mean, they've been pushing out so many great things in Edge. I'd imagine they'd want to adopt anything.
Yeah, it's just a matter of resources. Like any project, if you don't have enough engineers, you have to prioritize. But the shapes, so it also then clip path. So clip path is a different property. So let's say you have an image that's a photo, but you want to clip it so that it's not a rectangle. Maybe you want to make it a diamond, or maybe you just want to make it some sort of a polygon shape. You can use clip path to clip that object, and it will clip what's being shown. You can also clip text. You can clip anything. You just make an empty div and put some background color on it, and then clip it into a shape. You can make it into a star.
Nifty.
Which might not be the best idea. Maybe you really should be using an SVG to create an illustration. But there are times when maybe, like I built a website for a jazz album, a record company that puts out jazz albums. And I wanted to take all the bios of the jazz artists, and instead of just putting the photos of the jazz artists online as like regular old rectangles, I took them and like cropped them all a little bit into all these different polygon shapes. So
how
they
cool.
were like a little bit like not rectangular. So clip path uses the same kind of underlying geometry you can use a circle, you can use an ellipse, I think. I'd have to look this up, but you can definitely use a polygon. So those points. Now the thing about that polygon is like, well, where do you get the math for the polygon? Like, do you go to Illustrator and you try to draw a polygon and then you try to
bring it in somehow?
Math out? Do you like make it SVG? Like how do you get the coordinates of that stuff? And what happened is that Shape Outside was created by Adobe when Adobe had this little team called the Web Platform team inside Adobe. It was run by Alan Stearns, who's right now he's the co-chair of the CSS working group. And somebody named Razvan Kaliman worked with him, and I think they had other folks working there too. And they wrote the specification for CSS Shapes. And Razvan made a Chrome plugin so that you could add it to Chrome and have this tool.
Oh, and you could actually draw?
Where you could just like, you have to start with some kind of code in your CSS, but once you have it, you could click on it and it would show you the points, and you could grab the points and you could just drag them around.
Oh,
and
that's
you could make it, right?
Yeah.
And I saw that tool and I was like, this is awesome. I think this was back in 2015, 2014. And I started demonstrating it on stage, and I'd show a video of it in action. Everybody was like, And people wanted it so badly. But also it's a little bit buggy, and there's some things about the user experience of it because it's an extension to Chrome and it's not part of the Chrome DevTools that you, like Roswell couldn't make it better because there's limits on what you can do with an extension. And so I was like, we have to put it in Firefox and we have to make it even better. We have to add even more features to it. And so we did. It's in Firefox right now. And Razvan Kaliman, he had left his job at Adobe. And I was like, we have to hire Razvan. So we hired Razvan. So
serendipity.
Razvan finished up that tool and we shipped it. So you can use CSS Shapes and you can use ClipPath and you can kind of start. I have a video about this on Layout Land. So you might start with some sort of rudimentary code in your CSS just to get started, and then you open up the tool and you drag all your points around. And it's like you're in Sketch or you're in Illustrator or you're in a drawing program, except you're not. You're in a web browser and you're just dragging the lines on the website itself until you get what you want. And then it's like right there in the little CSS pane, and you can copy it and you can paste it into your.
That's so valuable. That's nice.
It's really cool that you're able to like be so hands-on in these new products that Mozilla is, offering for us. Like Jason Pimentel was talking about how you guys were working on a typography
font editor.
Yes. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yes. That's the third big thing. So, and also along the way, I was finding myself working with the grid inspector, and you'd have like the HTML in one pane and CSS in the other pane, and you can find these tools, or you can find the grid inspector and the font editor in the where the CSS pane is. Then there's these tabs, and there's the animation tab, and there's the computed tab, and now there's a new layout tab, and there's been a font inspector or font information guide in there for a long time in Firefox, but we've sort of completely replaced it with this new font editor. So that's where that is. But there's also this little button now, and I think it's clicked by default, where instead of having 2 panes, you have 3 panes. So you can have your HTML, you can have your CSS, and then you have your everything else.
Yeah.
So you can see the grid inspector, you can see the font editor. I knew especially for the fonts, because you're going to want to see the font editor and see your CSS right next to each other. You're not going to have to keep flipping back and forth with a stupid tab spread. And if you hate that, if you don't want 3, that's fine. There's a little icon up there where you can click that icon. It goes back to being in 2.
It's my favorite.
Yeah. So the font editor, I think the existing developer tools team had been discussing what to do with the font editor for a while, and they were trying to figure out how to evolve it and what to do next with it. And I heard about variable fonts coming. Yeah. And I personally, for a while, wasn't really a fan of the font editor, and I was a little bit like, maybe we should just get rid of it. I was totally wrong. But then when I heard about variable fonts, I was like, I know what we should do with the font. Because one of the things about variable fonts, right? So a variable font is a normal web font file. It's still OpenType. It's still WAF2. It's still all this stuff. But it's a new version of the OpenType specification. So OpenType got more superpowers, and in version 1.8 and higher, anybody who makes a font has the ability to export it in this way so that it has an axis of variation. So there are 5 that are registered axes. That's just sort of an agreement among people who make fonts to say, hey, if you're going to make it schoolish or you're going to make it bold, more and less bold, then don't just make it some random name. Let's have this that we'll all agree to use the same name, and we'll all agree to use the same code, and we'll all agree to do it in the same way. So there's 5 of those kind of official registered: weight, width, optical sizing, italics, and slant. Okay. Because they knew that those are going to be commonly added to fonts. Right. And that group of registered axes will probably evolve, and there'll probably be more over time. But the other thing that people who make fonts can do is just make up whatever. They can be like, this grows more worms. This one adds more leaves as if the characters are trees. This one has more sparkle. This one is a Western font. It gets like more Western-y. And these are all fonts that I've seen. These are all fonts that I've seen. So there's a lot of websites popping up. A lot of the folks who make fonts and who are excited about variable fonts have been building out these cool websites like v-fonts.com, or Access Praxis was the original one. So you go to Access Praxis, and there's a whole bunch of fonts. You can like choose different fonts. It's sort of a workspace. You can like set a bunch of type, and then you can see what's possible. And a lot of those tools everybody's using these sliders. So you can like drag the sliders around and you can kind of see what's going on with the font, and you can be like, ooh, that's really cool. I like that more wormness. Or that's dumb. I like whatever. I like this one because it's just normal. It like it gets very narrow or very wide or very bold or very unbold. But the thing that those sites reminded me of is back a couple generations ago, when you were trying to learn about typography or choose a different font. Especially I remember doing this back in the days of system fonts, like choosing a system font. Or what's the name of this project? It was this really good project whose name I'm not going to remember. That was a chance to kind of create your own set of content, very fiddly interface, because it's all built in JavaScript on a website, and so it was kind of fiddly and a little slower and more clunky than you wanted. But it was a chance to say, I'm going to put my content into a headline and into a paragraph and into another paragraph, and then you could just like pull up web fonts from services all over the web, competing services, and be like, well, what does this font look like? What does this font look like? What does this font look like?
Yeah.
And you could get to the point where you sort of narrow down your choices around which font you wanted to use or what sizes or colors you might use. And it really wasn't a place to refine your typography, but it was a place to start making choices, especially around what font to use. And Access Praxis and the rest of these sites reminded me of that. And my problem with those other projects was always I would get in there, I'd spend an extra 2 hours like loading it up with my own content. I would compare and contrast a bunch of choices. I would get to the point where I was like, that's the font. I want that font. And then I would buy it and I'd put it on my own website, the real website with the actual real content and the rest of the branding. And I'd be like, that looks totally different. I don't know that I like that font. Oh, I thought that was going to look great set at 1.4 M's, but it's really, now I have to start all over and tweak it again. Like there was something about being on a third-party app site that just didn't quite give you what it is to be in the browser with your own real website.
Right.
And so when I saw that happen with the variable fonts, I was like, yeah, that's nice to go and test drive and play and to learn about variable fonts. But when it comes to actually kicking ass and getting work done, you're going to need to be in your own developer tool.
Exactly, yeah.
And the only way to be in your own developer tool at that point was to just hand write the CSS and type numbers and type different numbers in and type different numbers in. And the registered axes, you know, you can use your weight axes using the font weight. Is it font weight? Yeah, font weight property. Or you can use the width axes with the font stretch property in CSS. Or italics and slant map to font style, or maybe not slant, but look it up. And so then you could be in there and be like, okay, font weight 200, font weight 300, font weight 250, font weight 247, font weight 245. But really is that, but the tricky thing is that the custom axes are sort of secret because they use this font variation settings property with this like short code, a 4-digit short code that you have to put in quotes and then some random number. And in order to know what number you should use or what short code you should use, like you have to go look all that stuff up.
Yeah.
And that I know from 20 years in this business that as soon as something becomes a little bit hard or a little bit extra work, like you totally don't do it. And also open type features. So there's a whole bunch of features that fonts can have around stylistic alternatives, different kinds of numbers, like old style numbers, or using certain fancy ligatures that you wouldn't want to use all the time, but you might want to use in a certain specific place, or swashes. Like there's some fonts that have these beautiful swashes. Do any of us use any of that stuff? We don't. Why? I was like, oh yeah, that's been on my back of my mind to-do list that I keep meaning to go learn about that stuff. Richard Rutter knows about it. Oh, he just wrote this awesome book about it, but I still haven't learned it myself. Yeah, it's because there's no quick and easy way to understand, oh, I have a font. Does it have open type features? Which ones? What's the code for writing them? And if it were right there in the browser and you could access it very quickly, it would be very easy to use open type features. Absolutely. Instead, at this point, there are no browser tools, and you have to like go to the font foundry where the font came from, download the PDF user manual that comes with the font, and read it.
No.
No. and you have to write this code that's like really strange and not implemented fully. And yeah, so I could see that the variable fonts were about to do the same thing, that they were about to become this thing that was too hard to use. And I was worried that all these people would stand on stage and be like, this is so awesome. And then the industry wouldn't quite actually adopt it because it's just a little bit too much friction in the process of getting it done. So I thought, here's an opportunity. Let's take the font editor. Let's make it much more visual, and let's make it into an editor so that there's all these sliders, and you can grab the sliders and you can drag them, and it changes your font directly, very much like Axis Praxis, very much like these other websites, but it's your real website. So you go to a font and it will show you the variation, the axes of variation that are available, and you can go ahead and just use them, and it changes the CSS, and you can just go ahead and use it. And we're about to ship October 23rd, 2018. We're going to ship that font editor into the regular version of Firefox with Firefox 63.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome.
And we just shipped support for variable fonts in Firefox 62 a few weeks ago. So Firefox supports variable fonts now, and it will have this tool in it. And if you want to use the tool today, you can use it in Firefox Beta or Firefox Developer Edition or Firefox Nightly, because that tool's in there. And my hope is that the team will have the excitement and the vision to go ahead and also add all of these open type features so that you can quickly see, do I have ligatures? Are they on? Do I need to do something about that? No, I don't need to do something because they are on. Or, oh, which kind of swashes does this have? Can I, on this headline right here, on this first letter on this headline, I'm going to go ahead and like use a fancy swash. And that stuff becomes like super easy for us to use. But I think the developer tools are the key to some of these things. Like, we need better CSS developer tools.
Yes. Thank you for being involved in that, because that like makes our jobs like just better, you know, and faster and fun. More enjoyable. Yeah, absolutely.
If it's fun to be able to try these things out, more people are going to give it a go.
Yeah, that's the hope. So yeah, check out Firefox. Firefox Nightly is the place if people want to get the, like, I don't want to wait, I want to use it right now. It's okay if it breaks every once in a while. I'll forgive you. Like, Subgrid will land in Nightly sometime soon, and when I say that the ability to check more than one grid at the same time, that will land in Nightly first. And then it needs to go through a rigorous QA process. And if it's at all slow or at all problematic, then it won't ship and it will hang out until it's ready and stuff. You know, exactly like a website. So, but if you want to jump ahead, especially for the developer tool stuff, because you're not waiting for something that your users have. It's just for you. So you can download Firefox Nightly and use it and check out the tools there. And also, if you are working in Nightly, you can give us feedback and tell us, I love that new thing. Or why are you adding that? No, that's bad. And like help shape the tool. Because, you know, what I've learned working at Mozilla is that the people who make rendering engines and the people who make developer tools do not make websites for a living. And most of them never have. So they don't know what it's like to be a front-end developer. And they need, or maybe they knew what it was like to be a front-end developer in 2004 or in 2009 or 2012. But now, because they're focused on making developer tools and they're focused on making a rendering engine, and we need your help. We need your help to remember what it's like to be you. And we need your help to say, I really do want that. This other thing, and you know, that would be cool. But if you're having to set priorities and I only get to choose one, this is the one I want. Right. The more people can say those things and the more they can ping Firefox people and be like, this is also true for Chrome, this is also true for Edge, it's also true for all of it. Like, I was surprised, but it's really true that all the browser makers need feedback. The CSS working group needs feedback. So. Yeah,
they need an authentic discussion, because a lot of times people think, oh, they got it. Right. I don't need to ask about these things. There's smart people that are already thinking about it.
And they are.
They are, to be fair, but it's also great to have that real world input.
Yeah. I mean, we know from people, especially those of us who design websites or think about user experience design, there's a difference between the people who obsess about the such and such website all day, every day, and the people who are just normal people who use it. And so, even though it's still technology people, it's like, well, these people write C++ all day. These people write Rust all day. These people are using JavaScript and React all day, but they're not building websites. They're building dev tools. It's not the same as the people who are making websites. So it's just this constant communication and information. It really helps shape, because it's customer research. It's like, what do you need? Let us know. And you do user testing. Let's see what it is that's working for people to make sure we make the right decisions.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah.
It makes me super happy. I feel loved, like, as a developer.
Yes, I especially, it's like, let's give it some CSS. Let's give CSS some
Yes,
love.
absolutely.
It needs it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a huge pain point, at least maybe in like, most companies that I've worked for, is like, CSS is like meh. It's always like the back burner thing. Like, make it work and then make it look pretty.
I don't know. We'll just put Bootstrap on.
Yeah, like just bootstrap all the things.
Not anymore.
It's so nice to be able to like go into because I do all of my development in Firefox nightly, just all of it, and then I check afterwards.
Yeah, you should. Everyone should check all the other browsers for sure.
But like I feel the most comfortable in Firefox, which is just. That didn't used to be a thing a year ago, right? A year ago, it was like Chrome. Just don't look at Firefox ever, right? And now I'm just like, it's home for me. So it's really nice to be able to like do what I do best and faster with Firefox.
And why did that change for you?
For me, it was using the WestBoss course first, and I was just like, okay, this is cool, but it looks kind of difficult, right? So I went through the CSS Grid course with WestBoss, and was just I was enamored with what CSS Grid could do and all of that, and I was like, all right, this is cool, this is fine, but I had to like download Firefox Dev Edition, and I was just like, why I don't understand. And so, going through that course really just made things like, oh, okay, that's what that's for. That's what this does. Like, oh, I don't have to like look at things awkwardly, like over here, right? Like I could have everything right. Like I can move all of the HTML to the side and have like my animations here. I can have a notepad if I need it. Like, I loved it. So now it's like, my tool.
Well, and I know that's cool. I'm glad. The DevTools team also is very focused on creating a kind of export changes. It's going to start out with a track changes feature, so that because right now, I think for many of us, especially those of us who were using Firebug and using DevTools when they were more rudimentary, you would just make only a handful of changes. You'd be like, I made like the amount of changes that I can make and still remember everything I did. And then you immediately go back to your code editor and put it in. And then you go like I'm gonna try this one thing. And so I don't know that a lot of people realize this if you're not a front-end developer, like it's this, you've got these multiple windows open and it's almost as if they're in one program because you're just in your code editor, in your
slide.
Your browser, code editor, browser, code editor, browser, code editor, browser, Git. Code editor, browser, code editor, Git, browser, but there is a way in which perhaps to make the browser more powerful, it would be great to be able to put more changes straight into the browser than you could remember at one point.
Yeah.
And you could like really go crazy and then somehow magically export the changes.
Save. Yeah.
You could save them. You could have them go and so the first thing that they're working on right now is a way to just get a list out, like a kind of a track changes type list of like, well, what did I do, so that you can then recreate it. I know they're trying to work out the designs right now around, well, what would be the next step of power at that point? Wouldn't it be cool if you could somehow like just create an email and be like, I'm not one of the developers on this project, but I have ideas about how it should be. So I'm just going to sit here in the browser and add them all in there in Firefox. And then I'm going to create an email and I'm going to email it to you. And you're going to click on that link and it's going to open up Firefox. It's going to open up our website. And then it's going to apply all the changes that I made to your copy of the website.
That's nice. Yeah.
And you be like, approved, or I hate it, or whatever. And we can have a conversation and then, right? So there's all kinds of ideas about what does it mean to have workflow in a team, and what would it be to go ahead and have something that's not just a temporary change on my copy of the website locally, but be like, no, I actually went crazy with it, or I did 3 completely different things, and then I want to email this to our developers and let them open them in 3 different tabs and compare and tell me what they think without needing to understand how to set up their own copy of the development environment, or without them being able to use Git, or without them being able to do the things. Because again, those things add a lot of friction.
Oh my gosh. So
yes. I haven't checked in with the team lately about where they are with it, but I know that they're working on this to figure out like, what would that look like? How could we do that? What are we going to do with that? So that you can.
It'd be so cool too to have like junior devs and designers kind of have that ability too, right? So that you could be like, well, if you set it up like this, it's a little bit easier for you to like get to this thing and this thing and this thing, right? And that way you can just be like, this is how you do it, right? And it's already there for them. You don't have to sit down for like an hour and a half trying to configure things.
Explain it,
yeah, it'd be super cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great for like students to work with their teachers or whatever, you know, there's all sorts of uses. So yeah, we'll see.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Sure.
Wait, did we even talk about your talk?
No, we haven't even talked about your talk.
Like loving on all of the awesomeness.
Oh, we're still in my bio.
Yeah, your talk is everything you need to know, or everything you know about the web about web design just changed.
Yes.
What changed?
So it's a little linkbaity, right? A little bit. A lot of things around user experience design or this is what responsive means totally have not changed. What's changed is graphic design on the web.
Graphic design.
Layout.
Okay.
It's changed drastically. In fact, it's changed so much that I'm actually daring to stand on stage this year and say responsive web design, and I mean layout, I don't mean everything else, I mean layout, is over. There's a whole new layout model. It's not anything like responsive web design. Let's call it Intrinsic Web Design. How about that name? Let's see if that name sticks. And yeah, what you think you know, you need to let go of because this is different. And it's not the first time we've changed. I think for a lot of people, they think that responsive web design is sort of the way we've always done it. Or maybe they think, okay, well, no, I remember there being a kind of fight about it and switching to it. So there must have been something before responsive web design. It was like, before responsive web design solved problem. But the model, like the layout model, the one that we've been using over the last 8 years is about taking floats and floating things and then putting percent widths on everything and having it grow and shrink at the same time.
Yeah.
That's the only tools we had. The only tools we've had in CSS the whole time we've been using CSS. Tools that work have been floats. But responsive web design has only been around for 8 years. And before that, we were doing a lot of fixed width design. But before that, we were doing fluid design. But both of that was floats. But before that, we were using Flash. We were doing all of our layouts in Flash. And it's just a completely different mental model because it's like Illustrator or Sketch, where you just grab an object and you stick it on the page and it stays where you put it, and then you drag it and then it stays there, and then you drag it and it stays there, right? Like Flash had that model of layout. But before that, we used tables for layout, HTML tables for layout. When people would take a HTML table and jam things, slice them into little puzzle pieces.
Oh, the good old days.
Reassemble them.
Make rounded corners with your tables, yeah.
And then before that was just HTML and flow layout. And if you look at the timeline, and I've created a timeline in this talk, you look at the timeline, it's like, well, we did this for 3 years, we did that for 5 years, we did this for 6 years, we did this for... Responsive web design has been 8 years. It's like the longest period out of all of those. Like we've been doing responsive web design longer than we were doing fixed width, or longer than we were doing Flash, or longer, which to me is super interesting. It's not a solved problem, and layout has been a pain because we've never truly had real tools to do page layout on the web, not tools that worked. We had attempts, but nothing really actually worked until CSS Grid. But it's not just CSS Grid, it's Grid combined with multi-column, combined with Flexbox, combined with flow layout being the original layout model of the web, the thing that happens if you do nothing. It's super important to understand flow and to understand writing modes and to understand how to manipulate that and use that, and understanding when to use it and why to use it and what you get out of it. And then there's all sorts of other little things, other pieces of CSS, things like object fit that really can help you create amazing, or CSS shapes that can help you create moments in your layout that are graphically really beautiful, or blend modes, or all these tools that we have, a lot of whom are new. And I do hope that we will not just take Grid, CSS Grid, and kind of make Bootstrap style layouts or make responsive webs, that kind of specific idea of what responsive websites are using CSS Grid. I mean, that is an improvement, and I think that might be an intermediate step for a lot of sites to be like, well, we had all this crap code, so we're going to strip it out, and then we're going to just do a 12-column symmetrical layout using CSS Grid. Like, okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not excited about Grid because it makes it faster to do 12-column symmetrical layouts, because I'm totally bored with 12-column layouts. And I don't think of them anymore. I think the reason we did them is because it tamed the chaos of, oh my God, we don't have any tools for layout. I guess we're using floats, and floats are super painful.
Made sense at the time.
It made sense at the time. But now that we have real tools, it's like, well, let's go back to the kind of creativity that we had in the 90s when we were using tables for layout and we didn't worry about how awful the code was or how unusable or reusable that code was or inaccessible or, you know, like our first impulse when we were getting creative about web design back in the 90s was an incredibly creative era with amazing layouts. Space Jam, all that. And we can do that. I did Space Jam and Grid. You can do all of that. But you know what? It's not actually, it doesn't work very well. I actually switched it to using transitions and other, I don't know. We still need something for circles. We don't have any good circle layout thing. But Grid likes to make boxes in 2 dimensions.
Yeah.
So I've been for 5 years, I've been really like one conference talk after another, trying to encourage people to shift our thinking about what layout is and shift our thinking about what graphic design is. And this year saying, like, I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to say that was responsive. This is intrinsic. We'll go learn about the new stuff. It's different.
Wow.
So that was my talk this year.
I love that. Why the name Intrinsic?
Intrinsic web design. So the word intrinsic really is about saying, hey, this layout model, this ability to do layouts is of the web. It's for the first time, it's really about the web. It's intrinsic to the web. This is the layout model of CSS. Like, stop using all these third-party Bootstrap, whatever frameworks. Those were a good crutch when we needed help because all the hacks were so painful. And you kept having to spend all this time doing the same hacks over and over again for different websites, even though you basically got the same results. And it's like, can we just stop repeating ourselves with the same horrible, painful code?
Yeah.
Like, let's just download a kit and we'll just, right? But we don't need to do that anymore. So really what this is about is saying, well, we've never downloaded kits for color palettes. We've never downloaded kits for typography. Let's stop downloading kits for layout and let's use what's intrinsically part of the web. Let's just use CSS for doing layouts.
Love that.
Not just Grid. You're not always going to use Grid. It's Grid plus Flexbox plus multicolumn plus Flow plus whatever else gets invented. So yeah, intrinsic web design. It's also one of the things, and Rachel Andrew is helping people understand this by writing a lot about this and talking about this in her talks this year. In order to truly understand the layout model, this new layout model that we have, you have to understand some fundamental things about the web that in the past we didn't really ever think about. And one of those is sizing. There's a specification called the CSS intrinsic and extrinsic sizing module. And there's all this information in there that is fundamental to understanding what's going on. So like, when is an image its intrinsic size? Like, if you export an image at 400 pixels by 600 pixels and you stick it on a website, there's words for that called, oh, that's the extrinsic size. I'm sorry, that's the intrinsic size of that image. It's just what it is what it is. Now, we who make websites have that. We've been doing that for a long time, but we never needed to talk about it. So we didn't have words for it. But the people who make browsers have words for these things because they have to talk about those things. They have to think about them in depth. So there are words for those things, and those words have been around for decades. But now that things have gotten more complicated, it's like, oh, well, you have a choice. With before responsive, you just put the image on the site and it was what the size it was.
Yeah.
If you wanted it to be smaller, you went back into Photoshop and you made it small. If you wanted it to be bigger, you went back into Photoshop and you made it bigger.
Yeah.
With responsive web design, you put a width or a min width of 100% on it, and it would like squish and grow. So in that world, it was like we used to always do the intrinsic sizes of images, and now you always do and then during responsive, you always resize it extrinsically, which means that there was some sort of external parameter, external code, external condition that was imposed on the image, and the image would be made whatever size it was, usually based on the size of the width of the viewport, right?
Yeah.
Because the image is 100% of its container, and its container is 25% of the total, and so calculate, math, boom, you get the extrinsic size of that image. So there's an entire CSS module about answering the question, how big is that thing? How big is that thing? Hey, how big is that thing?
Got it. Yeah.
And so the browser makers know this in depth. The browser engineers understand this. Like, oh, what does it mean to sizing? Right. Blah, 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 blah. But now that we have choices, because in the new intrinsic web design world, you could use an image at the size that it came out in Photoshop.
Yeah.
Or you can ask the layout engine to like resize the photo based on whatever parameters you want. You can do both of those things at the exact same time. You can put this one in a container that's growing and shrinking, and you can put this one as fixed right next to it, and it's fine. Like you can have a column of ads that are a fixed size with the IAB regulations, and then you can have like fluid content right next to it, and it's fine. Because the browser's doing far more of the math. This idea of like making everything be a column that's a certain percent, sometimes we're going to use percents, most of the time we're not. Most of the time we're going to use FR units. And it's just, the beauty of that math is amazing. And you can, it's just so much easier, and it takes a lot of the load off of us, and it puts a lot more of the load on the browser. Yeah. And it lets us imagine the layout model and the way we want to program the layout model, and then it lets the browser do all the math. We don't have to do all that math on Post-it notes with algebra.
Yeah, you want the browser to be smart, and you want you to be creative. Like you want your websites to be like fantastic. Yeah, I get it.
And it turns out computers are really good at doing that.
Thank you, computers.
Thank you, computers. Yeah, and so I have videos about all of this. It's lame without pictures, but I have a whole 3-part series about like sizing and like what does it mean to use an FR unit versus a min-max statement versus a min content or max content statement in your grid layout, or what is it like. And I'll be making many more videos about intrinsic web design. What difference is it? How is it different than responsive web design? What do we want to think of? I mean, one thing, so for example, if you take a responsive website and you make the browser narrower and wider, everything gets smaller or bigger at the same time at the same rate. But with intrinsic web design, it's very easy to set up a situation where actually this thing gets smaller until it hits a certain thing, and then this one starts to get smaller. And then this one gets bigger until it hits a certain point, and then this one gets bigger, so that there's multiple stages. Or where when you're squishing it, this one will get small slowly, and this one will get small much more quickly. So that the rate of change is different on different parts of the layout.
Yeah.
It's not the same as responsive.
It is not, no. Yeah, it's so cool. Smart.
It kind of feels like you were saying, like, you know, it is what it is versus like it is what it's not. I know that's weird to kind of say, but that's what kept popping into my head. So that's really awesome that like it can be what it isn't, right? Like it's not necessarily like a big picture, but we can make it big, which is really cool. So yeah, I don't know, I like it. I'm down.
I think we'll spend the next 4 or 5 years at least, if not longer, just playing and exploring and trying to and understanding what this thing is, because we just don't know yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm standing on stage as the expert explaining all these things, and then I go back up to my room and I start to, or people stop me in the hall or start to have ideas, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I need MDN too. I don't know. Just make a demo. People are like, how's this going to work? I'm like, I don't know. Make a demo.
Yeah, and try it out.
Put it in a browser.
Tell me.
And yes. And then you tell me what.
Yeah.
Because literally nobody knows at this point. This, you know, for a long time, it's been like, do it this way. Don't do it this way. You can do that. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Forget all of that. Throw all of that out the window. There are definitely limits.
Sure.
But we don't know what they are right now.
It's so exciting.
Explore. Do.
Yeah. Play.
Get creative. I just made a motto.
And when a designer is like, I have this idea, and the front end developer is like, you can't do that. It's the web. The web doesn't work that way. Be like, yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah.
We're going to make a prototype, and we're going to see whether or not it's possible. Because maybe it's not, but maybe it is.
Exactly. You don't know until you try.
Yeah. At this point, all bets of how things used to be are off, and we have a whole new thing.
I love that. So exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we've taken up far too much of your time.
It's fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for being a part of the show and coming on and talking to us. And
you're welcome.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll put a link to your slides, because I went through your slides, and like you said, you had a lot of good points on there. And we'll put a bunch of links to your videos as well.
Good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And stay tuned, everybody. We'll have a lot more speakers coming up.
Bye.